Ancient empires often built their most essential monument where you would never see it, beneath the feet of marching soldiers and traveling merchants. Vast road networks stretched for thousands of miles, laid down long before the stone of a single palace was set. Think of the legendary highways of Rome or the mountain-defying paths of the Inca. This creates a fascinating historical puzzle. Why would a powerful ruler choose to invest in these invisible lines of control before constructing a permanent, monumental capital city, the very symbol of imperial glory? By the end of this exploration, you will understand the hidden logic of power that forced empires to put connection before celebration. We will uncover why a road was a tool for survival, and how building a network to control living territory was more urgent than building a city to memorialize it. What does it say about true power when its first monument is not a place, but a path? The most powerful symbol we recognize today is a city of stone. A grand capital with towering walls and ornate palaces announces an empire's permanence and its ruler's absolute authority. It is the ultimate statement carved into the landscape, meant to awe subjects and intimidate rivals for centuries. This is the conventional blueprint of power. Yet history reveals a different first chapter for many rising empires. Archaeologists tracing the origins of great states often find something else entirely. They discover the subtle, enduring marks of roads, wide, engineered highways, mountain staircases, and long-distance trails appear in the ground, frequently older than the foundations of any monumental palace. This presents a compelling paradox. Why would a civilization on the cusp of greatness invest its labor and vision into lines of travel rather than a place of residence? The answer begins by rethinking what a center of power truly is. For these early empires, the capital was not always a single, fixed city of grand architecture. It could be a movable royal court that traveled from province to province, a sacred ritual center used for ceremonies, or a pragmatic administrative hub chosen for defense and communication, not for beauty. These were places of command, but they were not yet monuments to it. The monumental capital, the kind we picture from later history, is a project of consolidation. It is built when an empire is secure enough to turn inward and celebrate itself, but the road network is a tool of creation. It is built when an empire is still fighting to exist, to bind its scattered territories into a single, manageable whole. So the paradox isn't about having no center. It is about choosing a dynamic, connective system over a static, symbolic seat. One is the architecture of control. The other becomes the architecture of legacy, and in the fragile beginnings of empire, control always comes first. A road is power made physical, a direct line of command. For an emerging empire, the most urgent question is not how to be remembered, but how to survive the next season. A grand capital city is a declaration of permanence, but a road network is the mechanism that makes permanence possible. It addresses three existential threats simultaneously, transforming a collection of conquered lands into a unified state. First, and most critically, it is a military highway. An army confined to a central fortress is useless for holding a vast territory. But an army that can travel quickly on engineered roads becomes a reactive force, capable of crushing a rebellion in one region before the news has even reached another. The empire's strength is no longer fixed in one location. It flows along these paved channels. Second, a road is an administrative leash. Imperial tax collectors, census takers, and governors can now travel with speed and regularity, making the state's presence and its demands a constant reality in distant provinces. Resources, whether grain, silver, or manpower, can be systematically funneled back to the center, Finally, and just as vital, a road is a communication line. Information is the lifeblood of control. Without it, a ruler is blind. The most famous example of this logic is the Persian Royal Road, stretching over 1,600 miles from modern-day Iran to the coast of Turkey. It was not built for public trade, but as an instrument of imperial will. Couriers on horseback could relay messages from one end of the empire to the other in just 7 days, a journey that previously took months. This system, described by the Greek historian Herodotus with the famous phrase, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers," did more than deliver mail. It psychologically shrank the empire, making every province feel close to the king's ear. The ruler in his administrative capital, whether it was a movable tent complex or a fortified town, could now know of events and issue commands with a speed that felt almost supernatural to his subjects. In this light, the choice becomes starkly rational. A monumental capital is a long-term investment in symbolism and legacy. Its payoff is measured in generations. A road network is a short-term investment in survival and dominance. Its payoff is measured in the immediate suppression of a revolt or the swift arrival of reinforcements. One is an isolated fortress of stone. The other is the very system that prevents the fortress from ever being isolated. This logic reveals a deeper, more pragmatic truth about the birth of an empire. It is not first a project of display, but of digestion. An empire must learn to consume before it can afford to celebrate. Think of a vast, newly conquered territory. It holds fertile valleys, mines rich with metals, forests of timber, and populations that can provide labor or soldiers. These are the nutrients of a growing state. But they are useless if they cannot be moved. A road network, then, is not merely a path for armies or messengers. It is the empire's circulatory system, a network of arteries and veins designed for one primary function: to pump resources from the extremities back to the core. Every load of grain paid as tax, every block of quarried stone, every conscripted worker, and every ingot of silver mined from a distant hill, all of it must travel. Without the roads, this wealth is trapped in place, a theoretical asset that does nothing to strengthen the central authority. The empire would starve on a throne of paper claims. This changes how we see a monumental capital. A city like that is not a source of power. It is the result of power already successfully concentrated. It is a colossal consumer, the marble for its temples, the bronze for its statues, the grain to feed its thousands of workers and citizens. None of it magically appears. It is all extracted, transported, and assembled through that pre-existing logistical network. The roads must be built first because they are the supply lines for the very project meant to glorify the empire. We see this pattern clearly in the Andes. The Inca Empire at its height constructed awe-inspiring capitals like Cusco and the mountaintop retreat of Machu Picchu. But these stunning sites were in points. They were fed by the Qhapaq Ñan, the monumental road system that spanned over 25,000 miles. This network, with its suspension bridges and stone staircases scaling cliffs, was the operational backbone. It allowed the Inca state to practice a form of resource economics called mitma, where communities across the empire contributed labor and goods as a form of tax. Through the roads, wool from highland herds, maize from fertile valleys, and labor crews for state projects all flowed toward the centers of power. The sublime stonework of Cusco is the magnificent display. But the roads are the quiet, relentless system that made such display possible. They ensured the heart of the empire had a steady, predictable heartbeat of resources long before that heart was ever encased in monumental stone. The Qhapaq Ñan, the Inca's royal highway, was the empire's central nervous system. This was not a single road but a vast, interconnected web of trails, stone-paved highways, and staircases carved directly into mountainsides, spanning a distance greater than the circumference of the Earth at the equator. It connected territories stretching from modern-day Colombia all the way down to Chile, a realm of impossible geography that included some of the planet's highest peaks, deepest valleys, and driest deserts. And remarkably, much of this network was established and expanded even as the Inca state was still solidifying its power, long before Cusco reached its peak of architectural splendor. This sequence is the key to understanding their strategy. The roads came first because the empire's very structure demanded it. The Inca state was organized vertically, controlling a strip of land that ran up and down the towering Andes Mountains. This gave them access to an incredible variety of ecological zones, from coastal fisheries and desert farms to high-altitude potato fields and cloud forest orchards. But to harness this wealth, they needed a way to move it. Goods from these specialized niches like maize, wool, dried fish, and coca leaves were collected as tax and transported along the Qhapaq Ñan to massive state storage facilities called qullqas. These warehouses, strategically placed along the routes, acted as a national buffer, stabilizing supply and feeding the army and state workers. The roads also enabled two of the Inca's most powerful tools for control. The first was the rapid deployment of their army, which could march from the capital to a distant trouble spot with startling speed, ensuring no rebellion could gain momentum. The second was a policy of population relocation, known as the mitma. Entire communities could be moved along these highways to new territories, mixing loyal subjects with newly conquered peoples to dilute local resistance and spread Inca language and customs. So while Cusco was the sacred navel of the world, the cosmological and ritual heart where the Inca ruler presided, its symbolic power was entirely dependent on a physical system. The glittering stonework of the Coricancha temple and the precision-cut foundations were the empire's dazzling face, but the Qhapaq Ñan was its steady pulse, the relentless, practical mechanism that turned a collection of disparate mountain valleys into a single, manageable, and awe-inspiring domain. Perhaps no empire better embodies this principle than Rome, but the story begins long before the marble of the Colosseum or the palaces of the Palatine Hill. In the year 312 before Common Era, Rome was not yet an empire. It was a republic, a city-state locked in a fierce struggle for survival against neighboring tribes in the region of Latium. Its leaders were not emperors dreaming of eternal monuments, but pragmatic officials called censors facing a pressing military crisis. That year, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus ordered the construction of a road. It would be named the Via Appia, and its purpose was starkly simple: to move Roman legions quickly to the front lines of a war against the Samnites. This was not an act of celebration, but of desperate necessity. The road began as a straightforward military highway, a compacted gravel surface running 132 Roman miles, about 122 modern miles, southeast from Rome to the city of Capua. Its strategic genius was immediate. For the first time, Rome could rapidly reinforce its armies, supply distant garrisons, and threaten enemy territories with a speed that reshaped the entire conflict. The Via Appia was, in its infancy, a weapon, but its impact would far outlast any single war. As Rome's ambitions grew, so did the road. It was gradually extended, paved with stone, and driven further south, following the legions as they conquered the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia. With each new mile, the road ceased to be merely a path to battle and became the backbone of permanent control. Along its length, Rome planted colonies, settlements of veteran soldiers and loyal citizens. These were not grand cities, but fortified towns that served as living garrisons, securing the countryside and Romanizing the local population. The road connected them all, a tangible line of loyalty and law leading directly back to the Senate and people of Rome. Wealth from these new territories, spoils of war, and the fruits of conquered farmland began flowing north along the Via Appia. This influx of resources funded more legions, which built more roads, which secured more territory, in a self-fueling cycle of expansion. For centuries, while the Republic conquered the Mediterranean, the city of Rome itself remained a crowded, chaotic jumble of brick and wood. The monumental transformation, the forums, temples, and aqueducts of gleaming marble that we associate with ancient Rome came much later. That was the work of emperors like Augustus, who ruled at the peak of imperial wealth, a wealth that was only possible because of the vast network of roads like the Via Appia that had been binding the empire together for hundreds of years. The road was not a result of Rome's greatness, it was the cause. It projected Roman power long before Roman architecture could, turning the Republic's reach into a physical, undeniable fact stamped across the landscape of Italy. The very idea of a capital shifts when your culture is born from movement. For empires that rose from the steppes or the high pastures, leadership was not anchored to a single spot of stone. It resided with the ruler, his family, his advisors, and his treasury, all of which could be packed onto wagons and moved. This nomadic legacy created a fundamentally different imperial blueprint. The Achaemenid Persian kings, whose ancestors were horse-riding pastoralists, maintained this tradition of mobility, while they established administrative centers like Susa and Persepolis. The true heart of power often traveled with the royal court as it progressed between seasonal palaces. The empire was not governed from a fixed throne, but from a procession. In such a system, what is the most critical infrastructure? It is not a permanent palace, but the routes that allow the moving center to function. The Persian Royal Road, with its waystations and fresh horse relays, was not just a communication line. It was the tether that connected every satrapy or province back to a king who might be a month's journey away. It ensured that imperial commands, tax revenues, and vital intelligence could find the royal court wherever it was, keeping the entire vast territory synchronized with a moving point of authority. This logic reaches its zenith with the early Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan. Here was a state that conquered the largest contiguous land empire in history without building a single monumental city for its ruler. The capital was the Ordu, the great mobile camp of the Khan, a city of felt tents that could be dismantled and relocated across the Eurasian steppe. Control was exercised through an incredibly rapid relay system known as the Yam, a network of waystations spaced a day's ride apart. Mongol messengers could traverse thousands of miles in a matter of weeks, an administrative speed that was utterly unprecedented. This system bound the empire not to a place, but to a person and his immediate family. The monumental capitals of the Mongol world, like Karakoram, were built later by successors, often as a conscious effort to settle, to create a fixed legacy, and to administer an empire that had grown too complex for even the most efficient horse-borne court. This reveals a profound strategic insight. For these empires, a fixed capital was a potential vulnerability, a stationary target, but a road network empowered a philosophy of fluid, responsive power. It allowed the center of gravity to move to where it was most needed, whether for military campaign, political ceremony, or economic oversight. The road was the stable element in a system of deliberate motion, the fixed lines that made strategic mobility possible. Building a monumental city, then, was often a later declaration that the era of constant motion was over. It was a statement that the empire was now confident enough to plant its flag in one spot and say, "Here we will stay, and here we will be remembered." It marked the transition from building an empire to building a civilization. A capital can be besieged, but a road cannot be contained. This is the fundamental military calculus that forced early empires to prioritize the path over the palace. A monumental city, for all its imposing walls, is ultimately a stationary asset. It can be surrounded, blockaded, and starved into submission. A well-designed road network, however, transforms an entire territory into a living, responsive organism. It allows an empire to project force with a speed and efficiency that confounds its enemies, turning every mile of paved highway into a strategic advantage. The primary function is rapid reinforcement. A rebellion erupts in a distant province. Without roads, news travels slowly by foot or rider, and by the time a punitive army marches from the core, the revolt may have solidified, gained allies, and become a costly war. With a road network, the state's response is devastatingly swift. Couriers speed the news to the capital, and legions or regiments, already trained to march in formation on these engineered surfaces, can move at double the normal pace. They arrive not as a delayed reaction, but as an immediate and overwhelming demonstration of imperial reach, often quelling unrest before it can truly ignite. This system also enables sustained offensive campaigns far from the homeland. An army marching into unconquered lands is a fragile entity. It requires a constant, reliable stream of supplies, food, weapons, and replacements. A road stretching behind it acts as a literal lifeline. Wagons can bring grain from secure rear areas, engineers can follow to fortify new positions, and wounded soldiers can be evacuated. The Roman legions, for instance, were famous for building temporary roads as they advanced, but they relied on the permanent network behind them, like the Via Appia, to funnel the immense resources needed for years-long campaigns. This logistical backbone allowed Rome to fight wars of attrition that its less organized adversaries simply could not sustain. Perhaps the most elegant demonstration of this principle is the concept of fortified frontiers, like the Roman limes in Germania or Hadrian's Wall in Britain. These were not just static walls manned by isolated garrisons. They were dynamic zones of control, supplied and reinforced by robust military roads running parallel to the frontier. A fort under attack could signal for help, and within days, a mobile column from a larger fortress many miles away could arrive on the paved highway. The empire did not just defend a line, it defended a depth, using its roads to shift strength precisely where it was needed. The Inca achieved something similar on a continental scale. Their Qhapaq Ñan, with its staircases and suspension bridges, allowed a corps of relay runners to carry a message from Cusco to Quito, a distance of over 1,000 miles, in about a week. This meant a military commander in the northern reaches of the empire could receive orders from the Sapa Inca and deploy troops with a coordination that felt supernatural to their foes. The road network meant the empire's military power was not concentrated in one vulnerable heart, but distributed across a resilient nervous system. A revolt in one limb could be isolated and subdued before the infection spread, because the roads allowed the empire's immune response to act with shocking speed. In this light, the choice becomes a matter of strategic biology. A capital city is the heart, but the roads are the arteries and veins, and any ruler knows that a body can survive with a humble heart, so long as the blood never stops flowing. Information was the ultimate currency of power in a sprawling ancient empire. A ruler could command the largest army and collect the richest taxes, but if he could not hear what was happening in his distant provinces, or if his orders took months to arrive, his control was an illusion. This is why the most sophisticated empires built what we might call the ancient internet, a physical network of roads designed not for bulk transport, but for the lightning-fast movement of knowledge. The entire state depended on the speed of a single runner or a lone rider. The Persian Empire perfected this system with its royal road and the Angarium, a corps of elite mounted couriers. Herodotus marveled at their efficiency, noting they could complete the journey from Sardis to Susa, a distance of over 1,600 miles, in just 7 days. This was not magic, it was meticulous logistics. Along the entire route, at intervals of a day's ride, were waystations stocked with fresh horses, food, and water. A courier would ride at a gallop to the next station, hand his message pouch to a rested colleague on a fresh horse, and that rider would immediately continue the relay. The message itself never stopped moving day or night. This meant an imperial decree or a report of unrest could cross continents faster than most people of the era could comprehend. For the great king in his palace, it shrunk his empire to a manageable size, allowing him to respond to crises with a timeliness that felt like omnipresence to his subjects. In the Andes, the Inca achieved a similar feat without even the wheel or horses. Their system relied on the chasqui, specially trained relay runners. Along the Qhapaq Ñan, small huts called tambos were positioned every few miles, roughly at the distance a runner could sprint at high altitude. A chasqui would run his segment, carrying either a memorized oral message or a coded record on a knotted string called a quipu. Upon reaching the next tambo, he would breathlessly relay the information to a waiting, rested runner who would then bolt down the path. Through this human relay, a message could travel from Cusco to Quito, over 1,000 miles of some of the most rugged terrain on Earth, in about a week. The strategic advantage was overwhelming. A provincial governor plotting treason might find imperial troops arriving at his doorstep before his own conspirators from a neighboring valley had even been gathered. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. When news and commands move faster than gossip or rebellion, the central authority appears all-knowing and inescapable. This is the critical calculation for a nascent empire. Building a marble temple is a long-term project that announces your grandeur to future generations. But building a courier network is an immediate project that asserts your absolute authority over the living generation. It turns the abstract idea of rule into a daily, tangible reality for every official in every distant outpost. The road, therefore, was more than pavement. It was the physical layer of a vast communication protocol. It ensured that the will of the center pulsed outward and the truth of the periphery snapped back with a speed that made the empire feel not just large but coherent and alive. Without this constant flow of information, the territories would drift into isolated fragments, and the monumental capital, whenever it was finally built, would rule little more than its own shadow. A ruler's commands and a soldier's march are only one side of the coin. The other side is stamped with the image of a merchant's scale. For an empire to thrive, it must do more than control territory. It must make that territory profitable, transforming a patchwork of local economies into a single, functioning system. This is where the road reveals its second, more subtle purpose as an economic engine. By physically connecting regions, a road network dramatically lowers what economists call transaction costs, the hidden price of doing business over distance. It makes trade faster, safer, and more predictable. A farmer in a fertile valley can now send his surplus grain to a mining town in the mountains, knowing the journey will take days instead of weeks, and that the road is patrolled by imperial troops. That mining town can, in turn, send its metals to a coastal port for export. What was once a risky, localized barter economy becomes a reliable, long-distance market. This integration is a powerful force for stability. When provinces become economically interdependent, when the highlands rely on the coast for salt and dried fish, and the coast relies on the highlands for wool and potatoes, secession becomes unthinkable. Rebellion would mean economic collapse for everyone. The empire is no longer held together solely by fear of the legions, but by the mutual benefit of commerce. The monumental capital often sits at the very top of this system, not just as a political center, but as the ultimate consumer. It becomes a voracious market, drawing in luxury goods, building materials, and most critically, food from every corner of the realm. The story of ancient Rome is inseparable from its grain supply. By the 1st century, the city of Rome had swollen to over 1 million inhabitants, a size unsustainable by the farms of central Italy alone. The survival of the capital depended on a constant, massive influx of grain, primarily from the provinces of Egypt and North Africa. This was only possible because of the Mediterranean sea lanes, supported by Roman roads that moved the grain from port to inland distribution centers. The famous annona, the state-subsidized grain dole for Roman citizens, was the endpoint of a logistical miracle orchestrated by the road and ship network. The wealth generated by this integrated economy, the taxes on trade and the profits from empire-wide commerce, is what ultimately paid for the marble of the Forum and the spectacle of the Colosseum. We see a parallel, though distinct, system in the Andes. The Inca did not use money, but they mastered the movement of goods through their mitma labor system. The Qhapaq Ñan was the conveyor belt for a state-controlled redistribution economy. Maize from warm valleys, freeze-dried potatoes from the high puna, wool from alpaca herds, feathers from the Amazonian jungle, and coca leaves from the eastern slopes all traveled along designated routes to state warehouses. From there, goods were allocated to support the army, the state's construction projects, and the religious elite. The capital, Cusco, was the ceremonial and administrative hub where this vast flow of tribute was managed and displayed. The road network ensured that the economic lifeblood of a dozen different ecological zones could be pooled and directed by the state, creating a resilient, continent-spanning economy that fed imperial ambition. So, while the soldier used the road to enforce peace, the merchant used it to create prosperity, and that prosperity, flowing steadily toward the center, provided the material foundation for everything that followed. It turned conquest from a cost into an investment, funding the very monuments that would make the empire eternal in stone. But this choice between the road and the capital is not merely practical, it is profoundly symbolic. Each structure speaks a different language of power. A monumental capital is a declaration of arrival. Its towering walls and gilded temples broadcast permanence, a promise that this dynasty and its gods are here to stay, forever rooted in this sacred spot. It symbolizes divine favor, centralized authority, and the ultimate triumph of order over chaos, all concentrated in one awe-inspiring location. It is power made into a place, an immovable object meant to anchor an era. A road network, by contrast, is a declaration of motion. Its symbolism is not of arrival, but of reach. It represents connection, integration, and the relentless subjugation of space itself. Where the capital is a single, grand period in the landscape's sentence, the road is the verb, the active force that binds the narrative together. Its power is dynamic, expanding, and fluid. For a fledgling empire still stitching its domains together, which symbolism is more vital? The symbolism of a fixed, glorious center is potent, but it is also passive. It says, "Come and admire our strength." The symbolism of the road is active and operational. It says, "Our strength is already where you are." It carries the emperor's gaze into every valley and his authority down every trail long before his image is carved in stone. This symbolic language directly serves the empire's immediate needs. The idea of permanence can wait. The reality of control cannot. A subject in a distant province may never see the capital's splendor, but he feels the road's presence every day. He sees the imperial couriers speed by, the tax collectors traveling with their ledgers, the legions marching in perfect formation. The road makes the abstract idea of empire tangible and inescapable. It is a constant, low hum of authority, a reminder that the center is not a faraway city, but a force that has already woven itself into the fabric of the land. In this way, the road's symbolism is one of inevitability. It does not ask for awe, it demonstrates capability. It shows that the empire can overcome the tyranny of distance, the greatest natural barrier to rule. By mastering space, it makes its own growth seem not just possible, but natural and unstoppable. So while a capital memorializes a power that has been achieved, a road actively performs that power, etching the empire's claim not onto a single hilltop, but across the very face of the territory it commands. The true measure of an empire lies not in its grandest edifice, but in its most mundane transaction. A farmer hands over a portion of his harvest to a traveling official. A local dispute is settled by a judge who arrived on a scheduled circuit. These are the quiet, repetitive acts that transform conquest into governance, and they are utterly impossible without the road. A capital city is where laws are drafted and policies are conceived, a brain trust of administrators working in hallowed halls. But a road is the nervous system that carries those impulses out to the farthest limbs of the state, making the ruler's will a living reality in every village. It enables the most critical and practical work of empire, the daily machinery of administration. Consider the Roman Empire's vast expanse. The emperor in Rome could issue a decree, but its enforcement depended on a provincial governor in Gaul or a tax collector in Syria. These officials were not stationary. To govern effectively, they had to travel their territories, holding court, conducting censuses, and inspecting public works. The paved Roman highways made this constant mobility feasible. A governor's entourage with its clerks and guards could move with dignity and speed, bringing the tangible presence of Roman law and order to even remote districts. This system allowed for a powerful, decentralized model of governance. The empire was too large to be micromanaged from a single palace. Instead, authority was delegated to trusted governors in the provinces. Yet this delegation was a dangerous necessity, for a governor with his own army and treasury could easily dream of independence. The road network was the central government's primary tool to prevent this. Imperial inspectors and auditors, the emperor's eyes and ears, could travel those same highways to conduct surprise reviews. A corrupt or ambitious governor knew that a report of his activities could reach the capital faster than he could muster a rebellion, and that legions loyal to the emperor could arrive just as swiftly. The road, therefore, created a balance. It empowered local administration for efficiency, while ensuring ultimate control remained at the center. Without it, the authority of a distant capital would quickly dissipate into a fog of local rumors and unchecked ambitions. The Persian Empire formalized this with the office of the King's Eye, an inspector general who traveled the royal road to ensure satraps remained loyal and provinces were run justly. The Inca used their roadrunners to deliver quipu records from provincial warehouses to Cusco, allowing central accountants to track the flow of every sack of grain and blanket in the empire. This constant flow of administrative data was the lifeblood of accountability. It meant that a capital city was not an isolated seat of power, but the central processing hub for a continent-spanning flow of information and resources. The governor in his provincial mansion and the farmer in his field were connected by the same physical line. One planned the empire's needs, the other fulfilled them, and the road was the channel that made this exchange not just possible, but systematic and reliable. In the end, stone can proclaim authority, but only movement can enforce it. Geography is not a passive backdrop, it is an active opponent. For an empire rising in a landscape of jagged mountains, deep river valleys, or dense forests, the first and greatest enemy was not a rival kingdom, but the very ground beneath its feet. In these fragmented terrains, where communities were isolated in their own highland basins or coastal pockets, the concept of a unified state was a geographic impossibility without a technological solution. The road was that solution, a deliberate act of defiance against nature's divisions. Before any ruler could dream of a glorious capital, he first had to invent a way to make his realm coherent. The Andes Mountains present the ultimate case study. Here, the Inca did not simply build an empire, they engineered one into existence against a vertical world. Their territory was a narrow strip running north and south, but it was stacked, containing dozens of distinct ecological tiers from the coastal desert, up through fertile valleys, into the high puna grasslands, and over into the cloud forest on the eastern slopes. Each zone produced unique resources, but they were separated by some of the most formidable mountain ranges on the planet. For centuries, these zones existed in relative isolation, connected only by precarious footpaths. The Inca innovation was to transform those paths into a state highway system, the Qhapaq Ñan. This was not a luxury, it was the fundamental act of state creation. By carving staircases into cliff faces, building suspension bridges from woven grass across roaring gorges, and paving high mountain passes, they did something revolutionary. They turned vertical isolation into vertical integration. They made it possible for a llama train carrying wool from the highlands to reach a maize-growing valley in a matter of days, and for a military garrison on the frontier to be supplied from the heartland. The road network physically stitched together these isolated pockets, forcing them into a single economic and political organism. Only after this connective tissue was in place could the question of a capital be answered with strategic purpose. Cusco was not chosen at random. It was placed with brilliant precision at the nexus of several major valleys and at the convergence of the empire's most vital road arteries. It became the central switchboard in the network, the point where all the lines of control naturally met. Its grandeur as a capital was a consequence of its perfect geographic logic as a hub. We see a similar, though less extreme, dynamic in the Italian peninsula. Early Rome was surrounded by rival tribes in the hills of Latium, with the Apennine mountain range forming a rugged spine. The initial Roman roads, like the Via Appia, were driven through these challenging landscapes not for convenience but for conquest and consolidation. They pierced geographic barriers to connect Rome to newly allied or subjugated cities, turning the natural fragmentation of Italy into an artificial unity centered on the Tiber. The road came first to overcome the terrain, and the capital's ultimate dominance was the result. This reveals a powerful strategic principle. In difficult geography, the monumental capital is the trophy. But the road network is the tool that wins the game. It is the technological leap that allows a civilization to refuse the limitations of its landscape, to redraw the map not with borders, but with lines of communication and control. The capital becomes the symbolic and administrative crown, but it is placed upon a head that the roads have already brought into being. Power also flows from belief, from the shared conviction that a ruler's authority is woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. This is where the road reveals its most subtle and enduring purpose as a sacred pathway. Beyond moving soldiers and grain, these engineered routes often served as ceremonial arteries for pilgrimage, royal processions, and the movement of holy objects. They built a spiritual network, a geography of faith, long before a monumental capital could centralize that faith in a single temple. The road did not just connect places, it connected people to the divine, and in doing so, it forged an unbreakable ideological unity. The Inca understanding of this was profound. Their empire was not merely a political entity, it was a living landscape infused with sacred power. Scattered across the Andes were countless huacas, sacred sites that could be a spring, a mountain peak, an unusual rock formation, or the tomb of an ancestor. These were points of spiritual energy, and the Inca state did not ignore them. It systematically connected them. Stretches of the Qhapaq Ñan were designed specifically as pilgrimage routes to these huacas. The road itself became a ceremonial line, a physical journey that mirrored a spiritual one. By traveling these paths to make offerings, subjects were not just obeying an imperial order, they were participating in a ritual that sustained the balance of the world. This practice accomplished something brilliant. It took locally revered sites, each with its own community's devotion, and integrated them into a state-sponsored sacred geography. The road network became the skeleton of an imperial religion. This spiritual integration made the later centralization of ritual power in Cusco not an imposition, but a natural culmination. Cusco itself was designed as the ultimate huaca, a city laid out in the shape of a puma, with the Coricancha temple at its heart as the cosmological center. But its supreme sacred status was credible only because the roads had already linked every local shrine back to it. The capital became the spiritual switchboard because the wires were already laid across the empire. We see echoes of this in other cultures, where sacred processional ways led to temples, or where roads facilitated the travel of religious icons and pilgrim caravans. These routes transformed faith from a local practice into an imperial experience. A subject might never see the king, but by walking the same stone path that carried the idol of a state god during a festival, they felt connected to a larger, sanctioned order. Building these ritual pathways was therefore a profound act of soft power. It provided a non-coercive reason for unity, a shared identity rooted in common practice and sacred journey. It justified the collection of resources for road building as a pious act, serving the gods as much as the state. And crucially, it established the ideological framework necessary for a grand capital. When that capital was finally built, it didn't introduce a new religion. It simply became the most powerful node in a spiritual network that the roads had already made real for every citizen in every valley who had ever walked a sacred path. The monument awaited, but the faith was already in motion. Yet some of history's most iconic empires appear to follow a different script. Consider ancient Egypt. Its pharaohs are synonymous with monumental capitals, from the early dynastic seat of Memphis to the later grandeur of Thebes. These were not afterthoughts. Vast pyramid complexes and temple cities rose along the Nile seemingly at the dawn of unified rule, projecting divine power in stone from the very start. This presents a compelling counterpoint. Did these civilizations somehow bypass the need for connective infrastructure? The answer lies not in rejecting the rule of roads, but in redefining what a road could be. For Egypt, the primary highway was not built, it was given. The Nile River was the empire's central nervous system, a natural, flowing road that required no paving. Its predictable current and prevailing north wind allowed boats to sail south and float north with effortless efficiency. The narrow, fertile ribbon of the Nile Valley, flanked by desert, created a geography that was already integrated. Control the river and you controlled the entire realm. The monumental capital, therefore, was not separate from the infrastructure network. It was the central node placed directly upon it. Memphis sat at the apex of the Nile Delta, controlling the junction between Upper and Lower Egypt. Its temples and tombs were the ultimate destinations for the wealth that flowed ceaselessly along the watery road. The state's investment went not into building the path, but into glorifying the point where all paths converged. The Neo-Assyrian Empire offers another nuanced case. Its terrifyingly efficient war machine conquered the Fertile Crescent, and its rulers, like Sennacherib, transformed Nineveh into a colossal capital with vast walls, botanical gardens, and a palace that took years of tribute and labor to build. This seems like putting the monument before the mechanism, but look closer. The Assyrian state was a predator, its economy and power sustained by continuous military campaign. Its roads were often the campaign trails of its armies, and its control was exerted through a network of fortified garrison towns and deportations that broke regional loyalties. The capital of Nineveh was less an administrative hub for daily governance and more a terrifying trophy hall, a centralized repository for plunder and a stage for rituals of royal power designed to awe and intimidate both foreign ambassadors and conquered peoples. Its grandeur was the glittering evidence of a system that extracted wealth through sheer force, a system that relied on different, more coercive channels of control. These examples do not undermine our central idea, they refine it. They show that the imperative to build connection before celebration is universal, but the form of that connection is dictated by geography and strategy. Where natural infrastructure like a great river existed, the monumental capital could arise earlier as its crown. Where power was based on extraction and terror, the capital served as a fortified vault and a theater of fear. In both cases, however, the flow of resources and control, whether on river barges or along military supply lines, had to be established first. The stone of the capital is always the final destination for a current of power that must already be flowing. The moment of transition is often marked by a single, powerful question. What do we do with the peace we have built? After decades or even centuries of relentless expansion, of binding territories together with roads and garrisons and courier lines, an empire reaches a point of relative stability. The external threats are subdued, the internal rebellions are a memory, and the wealth of the world flows steadily along those carefully maintained arteries. It is at this precise juncture, when survival is no longer the daily concern, that the ruler's gaze turns inward. The logic of power shifts from projection to presentation, from the functional network to the symbolic center. This is the dawn of the monumental capital. The triggers for this shift are remarkably consistent across cultures. The first is the final consolidation of power. A ruler must have unquestioned control over the military, the treasury, and the nobility before embarking on a project that consumes vast resources for purely symbolic ends. The second is the existence of a massive, reliable surplus. Monumental construction is a luxury good for the state, funded by the accumulated tribute and taxes that the road network now delivers predictably. Third, there is a pressing ideological need. A sprawling, diverse empire held together by administration and force requires a unifying heart, a sacred and political center that embodies its core myths and justifies its existence. Fourth, dynastic concerns emerge. A founder who rose through conquest wants to secure his family's legacy, to transition from a successful warlord to the founder of a lasting dynasty. A permanent, glorious capital becomes the stone-bound proof of that transition. We see this transformation with stunning clarity in the story of Rome. For centuries, the Roman Republic expanded, its focus forever outward. The city itself was a crowded, practical, and often chaotic hub of politics and commerce. Its architecture a mix of brick, wood, and older temples. The glory was in the roads leading out to the provinces, in the legions, and in the flow of wealth back to the treasury. Then came Augustus. After the civil wars that ended the Republic, he stood as the sole master of the Roman world. His reign marked the ultimate consolidation. With the frontiers secure and the state treasury overflowing, he famously claimed he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. This was not an idle boast, it was a deliberate political program. The Forum of Augustus, the Aura Passus, the Altar of Peace, the new temples and aqueducts, these were not just buildings. They were a permanent ideological statement. They visually narrated a new era of peace, prosperity, and divine favor under the Julio-Claudian dynasty, transforming the city from a republican administrative base into the monumental stage for imperial rule. A similar, though distinct, process unfolded in the Andes. The Inca Empire had been expanding for generations, its power radiating along the Qhapaq Ñan. Then, in the 15th century, the ruler Pachacuti came to power. Following a period of crisis and military triumph, he initiated a radical refoundation of the capital, Cusco. He is credited with reshaping the city into the form of a sacred puma, rebuilding the Coricancha temple in dazzling stonework, and constructing monumental royal estates like Machu Picchu. This was not merely decoration. It was the act of a ruler who had consolidated supreme authority and now sought to crystallize the empire's ideology in stone. Cusco was transformed from a strategic hub into the cosmological navel of the world, a permanent, awe-inspiring testament to Inca divinity and Pachacuti's own legacy. The roads had built the empire, but now the capital would define its soul for eternity. The path had led inevitably to the palace. The Achaemenid Persian model presents a fascinating hybrid solution to this ancient dilemma. They mastered the art of distributed power, a system where the road did not lead to a single, all-encompassing capital, but to several. The empire was governed from a constellation of royal centers, each with a distinct purpose. There was Susa, the primary administrative hub, a bustling city of bureaucrats and diplomats. Ecbatana served as a cool summer retreat in the mountains. Babylon was an ancient ceremonial center, its prestige harnessed for legitimacy. And then there was Persepolis, the crown jewel, a breathtaking ceremonial complex built on a vast artificial terrace. This was not a city in the traditional sense with a large residential population. It was a stage. Its grand audience halls, like the Apadana with its 72 columns, and its intricate reliefs depicting endless processions of tribute bearers, were designed for one thing: to host the magnificent New Year's festival and to visually proclaim the empire's boundless wealth and the king's divine favor. Persepolis was monumentality in its purest form, a ritual machine. The genius of the Persian system was that none of these capitals stood alone. They were all linked by the lifeblood of the empire, the Royal Road. This 2,500-kilometer highway, with its waystations and mounted couriers, is what made this multi-nodal conception of power not just possible, but brilliantly efficient. The king and his court could move seasonally between capitals, following the pleasant weather or political needs, yet remain in constant, rapid communication with every satrap or governor from Egypt to India. The road network dissolved the tyranny of distance, allowing the empire's brain to be mobile while its limbs remained perfectly coordinated. This reveals a sophisticated separation of functions. Persepolis handled the empire's sacred and symbolic needs, its awe and ritual. Susa managed the day-to-day paperwork of governing millions. The road connected them, enabling a fluid transfer of authority and ensuring that the tribute depicted on Persepolis's walls actually flowed into the imperial treasuries. It was a system that understood power has multiple faces: the ceremonial, the administrative, the strategic. By refusing to concentrate all these functions in one vulnerable, static location, the Persians created a resilient and adaptable imperial organism. The monument was not the source of power, but its most dazzling advertisement, and the roads were the quiet, relentless circuitry that kept the entire system alive and responsive. Every empire begins as a startup, and its first major investment must show a clear return. In this starkly pragmatic light, the choice between a road and a capital is a classic cost-benefit analysis. Building a road network is an investment with an immediate, measurable payoff. It directly enhances military control, accelerates tax collection, and boosts trade revenue, often paying for itself within a few seasons through the very resources it helps to extract and move. It is a scalable project. You can build one segment, secure the area it connects, and use the new revenue to fund the next segment. The return is tangible. Troops move faster, messages arrive sooner, and silver flows into the treasury. For a leader whose hold on power is still tenuous, this is an investment in survival itself. A monumental capital, by contrast, is a massive, long-term capital expenditure with a dangerously delayed return. It locks up enormous resources, labor, and materials for years, even decades, with no direct functional output. Its payoff is not in immediate security or revenue, but in future prestige, ideological unity, and dynastic legacy. It is a symbolic return, a bet on the empire's permanence. For a nascent state facing rival neighbors and internal unrest, this is a luxury it simply cannot afford. Sinking your limited wealth into a single, glorious building project is like a new company spending its entire seed funding on a lavish headquarters before it has a single reliable customer. It looks impressive, but it does nothing to solve the operational challenges of actually running the business. The empire, in its fragile early phase, is in the business of control. The road is the essential infrastructure for that business. The capital is the corporate trophy that gets built only after the company has become a profitable, stable enterprise. The founders of empires, like savvy entrepreneurs, understood that you must secure your cash flow and operational dominance before you build your monument. This sequence of road before palace is not just a theory, it is written into the ground itself. Archaeologists and historians piece together this story from a mosaic of evidence, some etched in stone and some whispered in fragments. The most direct proof comes from the roads. Construction techniques act as a timeline. The earliest stretches of a highway might be simple packed gravel or a cleared path, while later expansions show sophisticated engineering like deep roadbeds, drainage culverts, and stone paving. By studying these layers, experts can see the network growing in phases, often long before the signature masonry styles of the imperial capital appear in the region. Physical markers tell a clear story. A Roman milestone inscribed with the name of a consul from the early Republic, found along the Via Appia, places that road segment firmly in an era when Rome had few monumental buildings. Similarly, the foundations of a simple waystation or a bridge built with an early, utilitarian design can be carbon-dated or associated with artifacts from a period preceding a capital's grand expansion. Written records, though rare, provide crucial confirmation. Roman historians like Livy and Appian explicitly document the construction of specific consular roads, listing them as public works projects for military and economic benefit, not as ornaments for a glorious city. For the Inca, while no written alphabet existed, the administrative records encoded in quipu, the knotted strings, are believed to have tracked the massive labor drafts, the mitma, that built and maintained the Qhapaq Ñan. Although deciphering quipu fully remains a challenge, the sheer scale of coordinated labor they represent points to a state prioritizing infrastructure over palace building for generations. Even the absence of evidence speaks volumes. At many early imperial sites, excavations reveal that the most monumental temples and palaces were built atop older, simpler administrative complexes, and that the roads leading to those sites were already ancient and well-traveled by the time the first foundation stone of the Grand Plaza was laid. Of course, the historical record is always incomplete. Roads, especially their earliest, simplest versions, are vulnerable to erosion, reuse, or simply being paved over by later civilizations. Organic materials used in early bridges or waystations decay. Many administrative records, whether on papyrus, parchment, or quipu, have been lost to time, climate, or conflict. This patchwork of evidence requires careful interpretation. Yet, across continents and cultures, the pattern holds with remarkable consistency. The durable stone of a capital may dominate the skyline, but the subtle, layered evidence in the soil beneath our feet tells the earlier, more urgent story of connection. It is a story of pragmatism etched into the landscape, a blueprint for power written not in grand facades, but in the very paths that made those facades possible. A grand capital, gleaming with new wealth, is a beacon for every rival and rebel. In the fragile dawn of an empire, constructing such a fixed and opulent target can be a catastrophic strategic error. It centralizes everything an enemy desires: treasure, symbolic authority, and the very heart of the state into one vulnerable location. An empire still wrestling with border conflicts and internal integration is not yet ready for that kind of gamble. Its survival depends on mobility, resilience, and the ability to strike back from anywhere, not on protecting a single, immovable jewel. The premature capital is a liability, a glaring point of failure that invites attack from without and fuels resentment from within. For a subject population in a newly conquered province, the sight of vast resources being diverted to build a distant, glorious city for a new ruler can feel like a profound injustice. That resentment simmers and the capital becomes a focal point for dissent, a symbol of extraction rather than unity. A rival chieftain or a neighboring kingdom sees not just a city but a prize. They know that capturing or sacking this one place could shatter the empire's prestige, decapitate its leadership, and seize its accumulated wealth in a single blow. History offers sobering lessons. In the ancient Near East, the magnificent Assyrian capital of Nineveh was indeed a terrifying trophy haul, but its very concentration of plundered wealth and its reputation for cruelty made it the ultimate target for a coalition of its enemies. When the end came, the fall of that one city effectively meant the end of the empire. The rulers who built it had created a monument so potent that its destruction became the only goal of every rival. This is the peril of putting the palace before the perimeter. A wise founder understands that security must be woven into the fabric of the territory itself before a permanent throne is placed at its center. This is where the road network proves its defensive genius. Unlike a capital, a road cannot be sacked. It is a distributed asset. An army moving on a road can change direction, reinforce a threatened frontier, or retreat to a stronger position. The empire's strength is not locked behind one set of walls, it flows along these channels. The roads allow a ruler to defend a realm, not just a city. They enable rapid reinforcement of any threatened border, making the entire territory a unified defensive zone. They ensure that even if one region is attacked, resources and troops from another can swiftly come to its aid, preventing a local setback from becoming a catastrophic breach. More subtly, the roads help secure the territory that makes the capital safe. By enabling effective administration and fairer distribution of justice, they reduce the internal grievances that lead to rebellion. By fostering economic ties between regions, they make the provinces invested in the empire's overall stability. The capital, when it is finally built, should sit at the heart of a pacified, integrated, and loyal network. It should be the culmination of security, not the cause of its constant testing. The monumental city is the reward for having created a world safe enough to build it in. To construct it first is to build a castle on sand, a dazzling structure that invites the very tide meant to wash it away. An empire is more than a map of conquest, it is a tapestry of people. Binding diverse cultures, languages, and local aristocracies into a single political body requires more than military victory, it demands integration. A road network provided the subtle, yet profound, mechanism for this weaving long before a grand capital could stand as its symbol. By enabling the constant, sanctioned movement of people, these highways transformed the static reality of conquered territories into a dynamic, shared experience of imperial life. The most powerful tool was not the legionnaire's sword, but the merchant's caravan, the pilgrim's journey, and the invitation to a distant court. Local elites, the traditional power holders in any region, presented a critical challenge. Crushing them created martyrs and resentment, ignoring them left pockets of rival authority. The solution was elegant: bring them into the fold. Well-maintained roads made this possible in two directions. Ambitious provincial nobles could be summoned to the imperial center, whether that was a fixed city or a traveling court. There, they would be immersed in the rituals, styles, and hierarchies of the ruling culture. They might receive honors, titles, or gifts, participating in a system that recognized their status while redirecting their loyalty upward to the emperor. This process of co-option turned potential rebels into invested stakeholders. Their prestige became tied to the empire's favor, not to local independence. But the road also worked in reverse, bringing the center to the periphery. Imperial inspectors, judges, and cultural emissaries could travel regularly, performing the rituals of state and dispensing justice in the name of the distant ruler. This made the empire's authority a personal, recurring presence, not an abstract idea. It allowed for a nuanced application of power where local customs could be acknowledged and incorporated, so long as ultimate sovereignty was recognized. This daily, practical interaction along the roads fostered something deeper than obedience. It built a shared imperial culture. Artisans and styles traveled. A pottery technique from the coast might appear in a highland village. A musical instrument from the core region could find its way to a frontier festival. Intermarriage between imperial administrators and local noble families created kinship bonds that spanned the realm. The road did not erase local identity, but it threaded it into a larger, common fabric. People began to see themselves not just as members of their village or tribe, but as participants in a vast, interconnected system that offered mobility, opportunity, and a sense of belonging to something historic. The Roman Empire excelled at this. A young man from Gaul or Spain could travel the paved highways to Rome, serve in the auxiliaries, gain citizenship, and return home as a Roman gentleman, building a villa in the local style but with Roman comforts. His very existence became a testament to the benefits of integration. The Inca practiced a similar policy, relocating loyal communities, the mitma, along their roadways to new lands where they would mix with and influence newly incorporated groups. This constant, sanctioned circulation of people, ideas, and loyalties is what turned a collection of conquered provinces into a cohesive state. A monumental capital built too early risks representing only the culture of the conquerors, a stark symbol of domination. But a road network used wisely creates the lived, daily reality of a blended empire. It builds the political community first through countless journeys and exchanges. Then, and only then, can a capital arise not as a foreign imposition, but as the natural, celebrated heart of a world its own roads have already made one. This foundational choice between the path and the palace left a profound and lasting legacy. Empires that invested first in their logistical networks often built a different kind of strength, one of resilience and adaptability, especially during their centuries of growth. The infrastructure itself became a permanent asset, a skeleton that could outlive the political body that created it. Long after the last Roman emperor fell, the roads he traveled remained, becoming the foundation for medieval trade routes and, in some cases, modern highways. Centuries after the Spanish conquest, the stone staircases and mountain trails of the Qhapaq Ñan are still used by Andean communities today. These networks were so well conceived, so perfectly adapted to the landscape and human need, that they transcended the empires that built them. They became part of the land's memory, a gift to the future written in gravel and stone. This durability speaks to the power of investing in connection. A road system is decentralized by nature. It cannot be toppled in a single siege or sacked like a treasury. It gives a territory an inherent cohesion that persists even when central authority fractures. In contrast, an empire whose identity and power are overwhelmingly concentrated in a single, glorious capital faces a unique vulnerability. That city becomes the empire's brain, heart, and soul, all in one place. Its fall is not just a military defeat, it is a metaphysical catastrophe. When the magnificent Assyrian capital of Nineveh was finally sacked by its enemies, the empire itself seemed to evaporate almost overnight. The centralized system of terror and tribute, which revolved entirely around that one awe-inspiring and feared hub, had no backup mechanism, no distributed network of loyalty or logistics to fall back on. The capital was the empire, and so the empire died with it. This is not to say that road-first empires were invincible. All civilizations eventually face challenges that test their core design. But those built on a web of connections often possessed a greater capacity to weather crisis, to reorganize, or to leave behind a functional legacy for successor states. Their power was embedded in the landscape itself, in the very ability to move and communicate. When we walk on an ancient Roman road or an Inca trail, we are walking on more than history. We are walking on a centuries-old argument about the nature of power itself, one that suggests true endurance might be found not in a single point of monumental glory, but in the countless lines that bind a world together. This reframing invites us to see these ancient roads not as mere infrastructure, but as the empire's original and most profound monument. While we are conditioned to look for power in towering walls and gilded temples, the true testament was laid flat and wide across the conquered earth. A road network was a monumental act of reshaping the world itself, a continuous, empire-wide sculpture of control. It declared order not in a single, static location, but in every valley it pierced and every mountain pass it conquered. The capital city, when it finally rose in splendor, did not create this order. It was inserted into it like a brilliant jewel set into the intricate, pre-forged setting of a crown. The crown was the territory, bound and defined by its roads. The capital became the focal point, the symbolic node where all those lines of control logically converged and were celebrated. This perspective flips our understanding of imperial priority. The grand palace or temple complex was the destination, but the road was the journey, and more importantly, it was the very act of making the journey possible, reliable, and repeatable, which is the essence of governance. It was a living monument, one that had to be walked, ridden, and traveled upon to be fully experienced and understood. Its power was not in being observed from a distance, but in being felt with every step, a constant physical reminder of a system that had mastered distance and terrain. So the next time you see a photograph of an ancient capital's ruins, try to shift your gaze. Look past the fallen columns and imagine, instead, the lines that once radiated from that spot. See the roads, those first and most vital monuments, stretching silently to the horizon. They were the empire's opening statement, written not in stone for the gods, but in the very earth for everyone who lived upon it. The answer, then, is written in the sequence of construction itself. Roads came first because they solved the immediate, non-negotiable problems of an expanding state. They were the tools of control, the lines of communication, and the arteries for extraction that kept a fledgling empire alive and growing. A monumental capital, in all its glory, was not the engine of this process, but its ultimate luxury product, a symbol that could only be commissioned once the roads had already delivered the security and the wealth to make it possible. This pattern across continents and cultures points to a timeless principle of statecraft, one that separates fleeting conquest from enduring power. True authority is not proclaimed from a stationary throne, but is first woven into the landscape through logistics and connection. The stone monuments come later to celebrate a stability that the roads have already built. It is a reminder that before a civilization can afford to make history, it must first master the ground beneath its feet. What other historical puzzles, where the practical precedes the monumental, might follow this same logic? And in our modern world of digital networks and global supply chains, where do we see this ancient principle of infrastructure first development playing out once again?